Hello, this is Pastor Don Long, and once again I'm here with my daughter Jordan as we continue in our discussion of the Jewish roots of the Christian faith. Jordan and I have been talking last week with you about the New Testament being a Jewish book. Let's kind of do a refresher on that, Jordan. We talked about the fact that when we look at the New Testament, we're looking at a book that was written by Jews, mostly about Jews, and for Jews as well as Gentiles. But the main thing that makes it a Jewish book is its central character.
Yeshua.
And what do we know about Yeshua?
He was Jewish.
He was Jewish. He grew up in
Nazareth. He was born in Bethlehem.
That's right. He spent most of his ministry where?
Jerusalem.
And also up in the Galilee. And you know, when we go to Israel, one of the things that we do on every trip, Jordan, is we love to get rooted in who we are as God's people, and we start our trips up in Alon Moreh, up there looking down that great valley. And what happened in that valley?
Alon Moreh is where Abraham stood under the tree, and God said to him, "As this land, as far as your eye can see, I have given to you and your descendants forever."
Forever.
Forever.
Right. It's really, again, as my friend Dr. Mark Spicer loves to say, it's not the Holy Land. Right. It's the promised land. It's promised to God's people forever and ever. So we start in Alon Moreh, and we see Abraham coming down that valley there. That's how he would have come into the promised land. And then we go to Shiloh. And what was in Shiloh?
Shiloh was where the tabernacle stood for 300 and something years.
Almost 400 years.
Almost 400 years.
And so we're there in that place where all of Israel came to worship, and we think of Hannah coming there, and then her son Samuel becoming the prophet that ministered out of there, the priest that ministered out of there. And so we're right in the heart of God's people. And then we go to Hebron.
Yes.
Hebron in English, and what do we find there?
That's where Abraham and Sarah were buried.
That's right. And it's also the capital, first capital of
David's kingdom.
David's kingdom, David HaMelech, David the king, and then of course Jerusalem itself. But I know one of the places we really love to spend time is up around the Sea of Galilee.
Yes.
And when we're up there, we go to Capernaum, and what do we find in Capernaum?
That's where there's a synagogue that is built, that was built upon the ruins of the synagogue that Yeshua taught in.
So when we're there, we're actually in the place where Yeshua did so much of his ministry. So much of his teaching was in Capernaum. And there's Peter's house there, where we actually have the foundation stones from Peter's house. It's like that musical, The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music. Well, the hills around the Galilee are alive with the sounds of Yeshua.
Yes.
And then we, last year, we went out onto the actual sea itself.
Oh, that was wonderful.
And there, you know, Yeshua crossed that sea so many times.
Yes.
And so the richness of it all. But when you're in the Sea of Galilee, when you're in those areas around there, you're traveling down the Jordan River, you're going to Jerusalem to Temple Mount, you spend 2 weeks there, and you realize you're in a very Jewish place.
That's right.
You don't come out feeling like you've been to a Gentile world.
That's right.
You know.
Because all those towns that Yeshua taught in, those were Jewish towns. He didn't go very much to the side of the Sea of Galilee that was called the place where the Gentiles were.
Right, right.
He mostly did all his teachings in the Jewish communities around the Sea of Galilee.
So the whole birth of faith, I mean, Yeshua in his life being a practicing Jew, a very religious Orthodox Jew, Rabbi Yeshua, we would have called him, and Rabbi Yeshua taught all his teachings to the Jewish people. They made sense to the Jewish people. They had a lot of Jewish analogies. He died as a Jew. He rose again as a Jew.
Yes.
His disciples who believed in him were Jewish men.
Yes.
As that core of disciples rapidly grew, when Peter preached the first message in Jerusalem, 5,000 people joined the church, if you will. They became believers. There was no church to join, but they became believers. They were Jewish
Yes.
men and women who received Yeshua as Messiah.
Right. And they weren't even called Christians at first. They were called followers of the way.
They were you could call them a branch of Judaism.
That's right.
They were completed Jews. They really, we ended last week talking about this, Jordan, they really didn't get converted.
No.
They didn't need to be converted.
No,
Why?
Because they were already Jewish. They were already had the Torah inside of them, and they knew very well the commandments that the Lord had.
So the Gentiles living the ways of the world and needs to understand, I have no relationship with God. As Paul says, you didn't have God, you had no hope, you had no people, you were not a people.
Right.
You come to accept Jesus, you come to accept Yeshua, but that accepting is not just saying a prayer. No. You're accepting His whole way of life. Yeah. It wasn't that I just said a prayer and now Jesus is my Lord. That is so far from what was happening. You abandoned your way as a Gentile. You accepted the fact that there is one God, He's a holy God, and that you need to have someone pay for your sins so you can be back in relationship. Right. The whole concept of atonement was a Jewish concept. You had to be taught that. And so you were literally converted. You didn't even know the 10 Commandments. But the Jewish man or woman who accepted Yeshua as Messiah, they already
saturated with them from birth. They would have been saturated.
And isn't that what the Jerusalem Council was teaching in Acts?
Yes.
When they said, we're not going to cause the Gentiles to have to be circumcised, but we're going to give them 4 rules. Go look it up, because they are rules of of avoiding idolatry, rules of kashrut, of kosher food, rules of avoiding blood, and rules of about immorality. And the reason they were given those 4 rules was, and no more, was because Moses is being taught in the synagogue every Sabbath. 2 things are implied. First of all, we know all these Gentiles are going to be where on the Sabbath?
They're going to go to the synagogue.
They're going to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath. And what do we know? They're going to be taught Torah.
That's right.
So it's not like, they're going to have to know the New Testament. The New Testament wasn't even written. But what they need to be converted from pagan thinking, Gentile thinking, to thinking like a Jew. And if they'll do these first beginning steps, we can now have fellowship with them, and now we need to teach them the Torah. Well, for the Jew who accepts Yeshua as Messiah, they already have the Torah.
That's right.
They already have the Torah.
That's right.
And that is such a different concept that the early church was to be grafted in. Paul was so clear on that. The Gentile needs to be grafted in, needs to become part of Judaism. And the idea is, if the Gentile tries to grow without getting grafted into Judaism, it's a wild olive tree.
That's right.
And we talked in an earlier broadcast, I think, about how the wild olive tree, it can grow quick, but it doesn't bear edible fruit.
That's right.
Isn't that interesting? It can grow quick, but it will not bear edible fruit.
Right.
And so Paul says, you Gentiles are wild olive trees, and the only way you can grow is if you're grafted into your Jewish roots.
That's right.
If you try to grow without the Jewish roots, you're simply a wild olive tree.
Right.
So around 300 AD, Constantine and the early church fathers decided we don't want to have anything to do with Judaism. We refuse to worship on the Sabbath. We refuse to keep kosher. We refuse to observe the festivals that God said are His festivals forever. And within 200 years of the establishment of the Church of Yeshua, what happened was that church severed itself from the Jewish roots. From that point on, what you've got is a wild olive tree.
That's right.
It grows quick and does all kinds of things. But there are many of us, Jordan, who believe around the world. This is a phenomenon around the world. Dr. Spicer asked me, he said, is this part of a denomination? No, it crosses denominational lines. All around the world, Sweden, South Africa.
Crosses cultural lines.
Cultural lines, black, white, Chinese, North Koreans. You'll find large churches, small churches, coming to really understand the Jewish roots of their faith and beginning to celebrate the festivals and beginning to get back to what God said are His laws that we should live. And it's interesting, many of us believe this is going to be the last revival.
That's right.
You know, we've had the Pentecostal revival, we've had the healing revival. How fitting that before the final return of Yeshua, think of it, He's coming as our Jewish king, our Jewish Messiah, and He's coming to Jerusalem. Before the final return of our Jewish king, isn't it wonderful to see the church beginning to go back to its first century roots and reclaiming the richness of a Christian of a Jewish New Testament?
Right. Well, then it won't be such a shock when we actually see Him, because He is Jewish still.
You think some people might be excited when they all of a sudden, what is that man and why is he wearing that?
Why is he wearing a tallit?
Tallit. You know, there's lots of books out there. And last week I mentioned the Complete Jewish Bible by David Stern, an excellent paraphrase of both the Old and the New Testament, but especially for the New Testament. If you can only get the New Testament part, do that. Get it on Amazon.com, or they actually carry them at Morningstar Bookstore. But it restores the Jewish flavor to the New Testament scriptures. You know, there's so much being written about this today. Jordan, why don't you start passing me those books one at a time there? We have this one, which is Jewish Roots, a great book put out by Destiny, a foundation of biblical theology that understands that we need to know our Jewish roots to really understand the scriptures. Then we have this one, which is a little booklet by David Stern, Restoring the Jewishness of the Gospel, how to come back. See, when we restore it, it's like a painting. You know, a painting that's got dust and dirt and grime all over it, and you take it to a restorer and they know just how to clean it, and all of a sudden the vibrant colors of the picture emerge, and it's far more valuable now that it's restored. And restoring the Jewishness of the gospel makes the scripture so alive, but it also makes it more valuable to us. And then we have a Gateway to Torah, which is an excellent book to begin to understand what Yeshua understood. He was a Torah observant Jew.
Yes.
You know, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. He lived his life by them, and a gateway to understanding that. And then we have the Torah Blessing, written by Pastor Larry Hutch, founded a church down in Irving, Texas, called New Beginnings. Powerful, powerful church. And Pastor Larry writes an excellent book about how when we get into the Torah, how it blesses us, something that's been removed from our heritage by the established church over these 1,000 years, but we get to recover what the early church had was the richness of the Torah. And this is one of my favorites. It's called Restoration, Returning the Torah of God to the Disciples of Jesus. This is put out by First Fruits of Zion. Restoration. In other words, coming back and returning to us as 21st century believers what the Torah is all about. You know, many Christians, when they hear that you need to go to Torah, they think you're getting under legalism or you're returning to legalism.
That's simply because they don't understand the richness of Torah.
That's right. And the Jews who understand Yeshua's Messiah, they're not under legalism. No. They're living out Torah out of obedience to God, not to earn salvation. No, salvation is by the grace of God. Right. But living the Christian life means living it according to Torah, restoring the Torah to the disciples of Yeshua. It's like having an old car that's been restored and now you can drive it around and it's shiny and bright and runs smoothly. This will help you lead your life better. And then one written by a couple called Torah Rediscovered, Challenging Centuries of Misinterpretation. An excellent book that will help you, again, put out by First Fruits of Zion, but helps you understand how so much of the scriptures have been misinterpreted by the church. They've actually been interpreted almost anti-Semitically. Opposite. That's right.
They were originally intended.
Simply because we didn't go back and say, let's look at this from the sight that Yeshua spoke them. Let's look at them through the eyes of a Hebrew and boy, when you rediscover that, you find out, boy, doctrines begin to clear up. The meaning of the festivals of God begins to, what God's design, what God's plan was.
Richness.
It becomes so rich. The scriptures become so exciting.
Yes.
And you begin to discover that from Genesis through Revelation, it's a Jewish Bible.
That's right.
It's a Jewish Bible.
That's right.
It's filled with the richness that God has always had for His people. So I encourage you who have been listening to us today to start looking into some of these books, start exploring the Jewish roots of your Christian faith. Understand that God is opening a wonderful door so that your faith can be enriched as you begin to study, appreciate, and bring into your own life a vast, rich tradition that comes from our Jewish brethren. This is Pastor Don Long and
Jordan
Long, and we are sure glad you joined us on Jewish Roots.